You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We cover haunting issues on the program today related to different kinds of commercialized human suffering, but also we cover what two different women have been doing to stop that. One guest is the scholar-author of a book delineating the actual monetary values placed on enslaved Africans in this country, from conception through death and even after. It's an expose of the institution of slavery from inside the minds of the enslaved that's never been researched and never been published before. And my other guest is the executive director of the leading international group fighting contemporary commodified sex, prostitution, and trafficking, which are actually the same thing. Then, of course, we have our regular features, Inside the Headlines, the Surrealism Corner, and today, an unusual Fighting Words. But first, to celebrate April as Poetry Month, I have a personal announcement. My 7th book of poetry, titled Dark Matter, New Poems, is being published on May 3rd. But it's already available for pre-order on Amazon and other online booksellers, as well as at brick-and-mortar bookstores. 4 of the Dark Matter poems appear in my TED Talk, where they've been downloaded over 1 million times. I do confess I love this book, not just because it's my newest creation, but because I think it's the best work I've done. And getting to grow as a poet is one magnificent benefit of aging. A special note for those of you who are or plan to be in the New York area in a few weeks. I'll be doing my first reading from the book on Thursday, May 3rd, 7 p.m. at Rockwood Music Hall, Stage 3, and tickets can be booked from rockwoodmusichall.com. Each ticket holder will receive a copy of the new book on entry, and I'll be signing books after. Seats are limited, but you can find more details at rockwoodmusichall.com. I hope to see some of you there on May 3rd. But now it's time to go inside the headlines. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than Donald Trump. Let's try. For this segment, let's try focusing elsewhere. In Dublin, the 9-week rape trial of 2 professional rugby stars has people fighting in the streets. Rugby evokes an almost religious devotion in the area, in what Irish feminists have described as toxic male culture in elite sport. Despite a record introduced in the trial of boasting texts between the men, they were acquitted. The expected acquittal didn't calm things down, though, because the players' contracts were cancelled, ending their professional careers, and zealous supporters are adamant that they should be allowed to play professional rugby again. Louise O'Neill, the Irish journalist and author, said, quote, "Whether they honestly think she consented or not, I've never met a young woman who left a consensual sexual experience in tears and bleeding." Rugby fans called for the divulging of the name of the survivor so that she could be punished for ruining the lives of these young men. Under current French law, although it's illegal for an adult to have sexual contact with a minor under age 15, the charge of sexual contact is considered a lesser crime than rape and carries a lesser penalty. In most Western countries, statutory rape laws mean that sex with a minor under a certain age is considered rape because the minor is thought too young to consent. France has no such law. All rape judgments must be based on proof of violence, force, surprise, or lack of choice in a situation. But the Macron government is proposing a law that would make it easier for girls and boys under 15 to prove they've been raped. That's still a very weak compromise, criticized by activists, yet it may be the only step forward for now, given that most cases are not pursued or dropped, and victim blaming, even when the victim is a child, is epidemic. Recently, public opinion was galvanized by the case of an 11-year-old girl who was left pregnant after being attacked in a public park. The man was caught, identified, and denied the accusation, and he was acquitted. But public opinion is changing under the Me Too effect, and now is lending urgency to the proposed change in law. In India, a series of especially horrific rapes and rape murders have precipitated soaring interest in self-defense classes for girls. New Delhi policewomen have been teaching free 10-day courses for 8 years in the city's public schools and universities, and those courses are always booked 6 months in advance. But current national outrage over the kidnapping, rape, and murder of an 8-year-old girl has inspired more such classes springing up across the country. One student said, "Men treat us like we aren't human, and the police don't protect us, so we're learning to protect ourselves." The case of the 8-year-old has caused nationwide protests and put the Hindu fundamentalist government of Prime Minister Modi in crisis. The child was from a nomadic Muslim community. The attackers were Hindu. And Modi has been appallingly silent, finally speaking out too little and far too late. In this edition of Inside the Headlines, I focused on only a few examples in a few countries of a few kinds of violence. I wanted to try and get through one entire news segment without mentioning the numerous kinds of policy and personal violence perpetrated on women by Donald Trump. Well, just look around. But I will close on 2 unexpected, positive notes from unexpected places. Almost 2 years after participating in a men care, fathers and couples program in Rwanda, men are half as likely to use violence against their female partners and spend almost 1 hour more per day doing household chores. And men care is known as Program P globally, and it's known as Program Role Model in Rwanda. The other unlikely site for news of positive strategic change is the Gaza Strip. I spent time there during the 1980s on 2 different occasions with Palestinian women in the refugee camps during the First Intifada. The women were trying to mount a nonviolent resistance movement in the tradition invented by Indian women in the 19th century, which Gandhi admitted he copied and then made world famous, which in turn was adopted by Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States. But in the Gaza Strip, ruins, blood, rage, and agony everywhere, nonviolent resistance seemed both the most needed and the most impossible of strategies. The women said they would keep at it. 10 or 15 years later, the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, renounced violence and was denounced by many of its own people for doing so. Hamas became the flag bearer of militants, and ever since, Hamas and the PLO have been at odds. I've stayed in touch with the Gazan women, treasured friendships of my life, so I know that through despair and exhaustion, they never stopped working for their plan. Well, on April 15th of this year, the political leadership of Hamas, the group that has tried suicide bombs, rockets, and attack tunnels in the long battle for independence from Israel, that leadership stood before portraits of Gandhi, King, and Nelson Mandela, and announced a new campaign of protests that would be, quote, national, peaceful, popular, and civilized, end quote. The portraits on the wall and the people speaking in front of them were all men, but I knew that somewhere, unseen, the women were laughing. Zahra and Rula and Abla and Saba and Najat and Aziza and Isam and Fatma and Tahrir, those of them still alive, were dancing. It's time for a break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, but I'll be right back with my first guest and a discussion about a part of American history, the root, in a sense, of American history, that Americans usually want to forget.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. My first guest is Daina Ramey Berry. She's an associate professor of history and of African and African diaspora studies and the Oliver H. Radke Fellow, in American history at the University of Texas at Austin. She's the author of Swing the Sickle for the Harvest is Ripe, Gender and Slavery in Antebellum Georgia, and the award-winning editor of Enslaved Women in America, an encyclopedia. She is an advocate for public history and served as one of the technical advisors for the remake of the miniseries Roots, and she is currently co-editing Sexuality and Slavery, Reclaiming Intimate Histories in the Americas, and co-authoring A Black Woman's History of the United States. And today she's here to talk about her most recent book, The Price for Their Pound of Flesh, and it is dynamite. Here is Dr. Daina Ramey Berry. Dr. Berry, Daina, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
The book is called The Price for Their Pound of Flesh, and the subtitle is The Value of the Enslaved from Womb to Grave in the Building of a Nation, a tracing of the valuation of African enslaved human beings brought to this country from literally the purchasing of women for their breeding qualities, and the infant in their wombs or to be in their wombs, straight on through to the use of cadavers of black enslaved people for quote-unquote medical research. How did you come to do this extensive and in-depth breadth of history?
Well, I first was interested in just the values. I wanted to know how much enslaved people cost. And we had seen that in literature. A number of historians have written about values, and they had numbers in their books, but they didn't really have the contextual analysis of it. So I thought, I'm going to write this book that's going to tell people what $700 means for a male age 18 and what $200 means for a little girl that's 5 years old. Mm. But while I was doing the research, I'm trained as a social historian, and I'm a people person, and I also was trained as a labor historian. I was distracted by the fact that no one had thought about what did enslaved people think, feel, or understand, or even know about the commodification on their bodies. And their voices just were literally jumping off the pages as I was looking for numbers. And I thought, you know what, I'm not so much interested in the numbers, and I don't have enough data, even though I had a large data set. I don't have enough data to tell a representative story about what these numbers mean. So I'll put this in here at the top of each of the chapters, but let me tell the reader something else that I don't think anyone's thought about or really talked about as much. And that is how enslaved people processed themselves as being treated as a piece of property from before they were born, as you mentioned. You know, even prior to conception, they were already being valued. That's what I decided I wanted to do, the full life cycle.
What could be more, qualify more as representative data than the actual voices of the enslaved, which nobody has charted before? And that was an easy thing to do, to make your voice heard or to leave traces of your voice. But what there was left, you managed to find.
Yeah, and, you know, part of the problem was that people have dismissed. These narratives have been around. And there are other historians that have woven them in through their work, but they didn't look at the enslaved person as a commentator on that experience in a way that I was trying to do it. I think Ed Baptist does it in The Half Has Never Been Told, where he does weave in enslaved people's voices. And there are people that use slave narratives, but a lot of scholars dismissed the narratives and said, oh, it's a biased source. You know, we...
Oh, my God.
Which is interesting, right?
That's so sick. It is so sick. That's a biased source, the voice of the enslaved.
What source isn't, though?
Oh, right. My God. Well, of course, the voice of the masters and the purchasers and the sellers. Now, that's not unbiased? Oh, exactly. My God.
Yeah. And that's what the majority of this literature has been taught. The history of slavery has often been taught from large plantation records. And I use them as well. But my goal was to ask the question and think about it in a different direction. Like, how does this story change if we think about it from the person that's standing on the auction block? I can tell you a description from someone who witnessed it, but let me try to bring the reader to the space of the block, looking at the audience, looking at them. How different is this story, and how would we write that narrative? And that was essentially what I tried to do.
Well, this is the first book that I've read that really takes you then inside the enslaved experience in a very real way. I mean, we have a quote here or there from, the great Harriet Tubman, or we have a quote here or there but these are quote unquote ordinary people who have a real, very perceptive and sophisticated articulation of the agony of their experience. And I cannot see, this should be taught in schools. Every American of any ethnic background should be made to read this book, because the identification with the enslaved is unavoidable, and with their humanity.
Thank you.
A great deal of attention has focused on the after-death enslavement, on what you call the ghost value, the use of dead Africans as the whole cadaver market, and that of course continued post emancipation well into the 19th century,
20th century.
20th century. Well, yes, because then its descendants, as it were, historically were the Tuskegee experiments, and then Henrietta Lacks, and one thing that fascinated me was that the world somehow knows, I'm sure not everybody, but it seemed to be common knowledge that when the Nazis made lampshades out of the skin of Jews who had been in the concentration camps, and everybody was duly horrified. Meanwhile, this was going on under everybody's nose back home. Talk about that whole the valuation of the cadaver straight on through. Every penny was wrung from a black life.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, I first noticed it when I saw references, one or two sentences in the work of a few scholars, and journalist Harriet Washington wrote about it in Medical Apartheid. Todd Savitt did in Medicine and Slavery. But I had come across Nat Turner, was really the person that introduced me into this cadaver trade, was that his body was valued right before he was hung. And then his estate received compensation because he had killed his owners, right? They received compensation for his dead body. And I thought, well, wait a minute. People are getting paid for dead slaves. I was like, well, this is something I had not seen before. Yeah. And then I was just starting to trace that, and I realized that there was a whole market, and there was a whole trade that was very similar to the domestic slave trade, very similar to the transatlantic. And some enslaved bodies were put in these whiskey casks and traded along the same routes as they were when they were alive. As part of the domestic market. Yeah. And so I just tried to really outline that trade. I mean, there's so much more work that needs to be done in that area, and I'm hoping that graduate students and other scholars that are interested in this will do that work to look at this trade and to understand it as an aspect of the afterlives of slavery, as I call it.
And this was not only in medical schools in the South. It was medical schools in the North. It was Harvard. It was Penn. It sears the brain. I mean,
Dartmouth. Yes.
Dartmouth. Right. And some of the body snatchers or cadaver purveyors were themselves enslaved people.
Yes, and that to me, it's a place where we need to pause on that, because this is something that would change the way we understand the system of slavery. We can talk about enslaved people in urban spaces. We mostly think about them on large cotton plantations, but here's another site of enslavement that has rarely received any attention. What does it mean to be an enslaved man and woman or an enslaved family that works at a medical school, and you spend your lives cleaning up dissection rooms and dealing with dead bodies of people that look like you? What does that mean? And how does that experience differ from someone that's working as a shoemaker or a blacksmith or a butcher in an urban space? Slavery is very diverse, and when we add this piece of enslaved people that worked at medical colleges and universities, it opens up a whole different understanding of the institution.
Yeah, it's no wonder that this nation hasn't dealt with slavery, because the saturation in the consciousness and the psychosis of this country. The saturation of the institution of slavery runs so deep. We speak of institutionalization of racism, but this is beyond even institutionalization. This is woven into the weave of the fabric itself, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's everywhere. And I say this, I've been saying this when I'm speaking about the book, is that, I feel like we're stumbling now on the bones of slavery, literally. We're stumbling, we're unearthing cemeteries and grave sites. And because we haven't dealt with this history as a country as a whole, we're now being forced to deal with it as we stumble upon bodies, body parts, pieces. And as we learn more about this history, I think hopefully we'll start to have these conversations and understand that slavery was a major part, and still the legacies of slavery have benefited so many coming out of the institution.
And one of the moments that touched me was when, was it Lucretia Mott, who was, of course, a women's suffrage rights campaigner, gave us, and a major abolitionist, gave a speech in which it's implied that she knew about this, isn't it? I mean, tell about that.
She was giving that speech. She was giving a speech to a medical class in Pennsylvania, and it's sort of woven in there, but it's hidden a little bit. But she's clearly aware, and she's questioning the morality of what's happening with this trade and with bodies, and how we recognize. I mean, I'm going to use a contemporary term, but how we recognize Black life. And so she's talking to their moral duties. She's trying to speak to the heart of these medical students about it. And I thought that was, when I found that in the archives, I thought, what a powerful person who we've read about for years, who is now sort of trying to find a way to have a conversation about this practice that was happening at the time.
Yeah.
And that's why I included that in there, is that this was very common. And most of the prominent members of medical faculty, students, and people who went on to be some of the most well-known physicians in our nation's history were aware, participated, or supported, or allowed this traffic and trade to happen.
Well, you point out that every time a woman goes to her gynecologist, we should think about this, that the so-called father of gynecology, Dr. James Marion Sims, conducted his research on enslaved women. So what we know about gynecology is thanks to the suffering and the abuse of Black women's bodies. I mean, it's just
absolutely, and that's why the contemporary arguments about statues came to him, because people that didn't know that history were wondering why there was a protest movement of people trying to take down a statue of J. Marion Sims from New York. Well, it's because of his ties to slavery and him not really acknowledging the work that he did on enslaved women's bodies.
Yeah, it leaves you just absolutely speechless. I mean, but fortunately, this has received rave reviews, and you're working on a documentary series about women in American history.
Yes, I'm very excited with Inlight Productions. We're doing a series on women of all races, all nationalities and ethnicities who contributed to American history. Some of them are lesser known figures. Some of them are people you've heard of, but just women who changed America. And the series is called Making History, and it's produced by Inlight Productions. And we are pitching right now, waiting to find out what channel or station it will be on. And I hope to be able to announce that soon. And there's all the top historians that are covering, we're interviewing for this series, and I think it will be a great way to share the history of women's contributions to U.S. history in a different venue.
Wow, you are a one-woman revolution. The current book is called The Price for Their Pound of Flesh: The Value of the Enslaved from Womb to Grave in the Building of a Nation. The Price for Their Pound of Flesh. It's a stunning book. Thank you, Daina Ramey Berry, for being with us today, and thank you for your amazing scholarship and for giving us this book and the rest of your work.
Oh, thank you. It was an honor to be here. I really appreciate it.
Come with me into the Surrealism Corner. We have only one item in the corner today, but as my long-departed aunt used to say, it's a doozy. The committee that awards the Nobel Prize in Literature is convulsed in acrimony and scandal. Jean-Claude Arnault, a major cultural figure with close ties to the Swedish Academy that oversees the Nobels, he has been accused by 18 women of sexual assault. Arnault and his wife, the poet Katarina Frostenson, herself an Academy board member, run a private cultural club that receives money from the Academy. Swedish police have opened an investigation into charges that Arnault abused women at the club and at other Academy-owned properties in Stockholm and Paris over a 20-year period. 3 Academy board members resigned in protest against Arnault's behavior. The Academy then severed ties with him and with the club and hired an independent law firm to review its past links to him, since he's also been criticized for having leaked names of awardees in advance for years. The investigation found, quote, financial irregularities, close quote, and recommended reporting them to the police. Meanwhile, Frostenson, that's his wife, remember, ignored calls for her to step down from the board of directors, causing a further schism with more board members threatening to walk out if she stayed. As an aside, I'd note that it's hardly fair to blame a woman for her husband's behavior, unless it's clear that she actively participated in it. They are financial partners in the clubs. Intensifying the scandal, new evidence shows that as early as 1996, a textile artist, Anna-Karin Bylund, complained to the Academy's then top administrator, Sture Allen, about the abuse by Mr. Arnault. But Allen did not act on her letter because, quote, its contents didn't seem important, close quote. King Gustav XVI and the Nobel Foundation, which administers the prizes, expressed concern that confidence in the prestigious Swedish Academy has been severely damaged. You think? The crisis has also exposed a deep rift within the Academy. One interesting example of this is Horace Engdahl, an admirer of Arnault, who refers to the sexual assaults as, quote, indiscretions, and who blamed the whole controversy on literary scholar Sarah Danius, the Academy's new administrator and the first woman to occupy that post. Danius is widely regarded as a force for reform and modernization. Her great sin, in the eyes of Engdahl, is that it was she who hired the independent law firm to investigate charges against Arnault in the first place. Engdahl's ex-wife, Ebba Witt-Brattström, herself a professor of Nordic literature at the University of Helsinki and no slouch, then publicly denounced her ex-husband and called the Academy, quote, incredibly patriarchal, adding that Sarah Danius was being bullied for being an outspoken woman. Now, if you're still with me, it looks as if the misogynistic old guard has won. Sarah Danius was ousted last week. Engdahl and the rest of his boys' club faction claim that the reason was her having been, quote, a weak leader. But his ex-wife, Ebba Witt-Brattström, weighed in again, publicly accusing this, quote, male backlash of old entrenched men of having orchestrated a palace revolution, a coup to get rid of Danius because she's headstrong and a headstrong woman is not what they're used to, close quote. Danius herself gave a press conference surrounded by women authors. She spoke little of herself, but expressed concern about the damaged reputation of the Nobels. In replying to questions about why there have been so few female Nobel literary laureates since the prizes were founded in 1786, she said that the Academy must work against, quote, outmoded power structures and manifestations of misogyny, close quote. But the story's not over yet. I mean, this is Sweden, for God's sake, where they're trying to introduce the use of gender-free pronouns. So, the day after the firing, women all across Sweden began to wear pussycat bow blouses in a show of feminist solidarity with Sarah Danius, who had worn such shirts frequently and become identified with them, like Hillary and the pantsuit. Previously, the pussycat bows were mostly worn by older women professionals and scorned by everyone else, but now they're hot. The Minister of Democracy and Culture, Alice Bah Kuhnke, posted a picture of herself in one such blouse on Instagram. Swedish millennials are sporting the look, and men have been expressing sartorial support as well. Michael Damberg, Sweden's innovation minister, posted a picture of himself wearing a scarf knotted at the neck, along with members of his team in the Ministry of Finance. The Me Too movement has taken over social media in Sweden with pussycat bow vengeance, and the police investigation continues. Katarina Frostenson has left the academy, and Arnold has hired a lawyer. The king has stepped in to try to calm the furor, but other members of this very democratic royal family were seen wearing pussycat bows. It's a story that is decidedly surreal, and also definitely not over yet. Have some gravidlocks. Stay tuned. It's time for another pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and coming right up, we're having a discussion about the world's largest underground and now overground industry, the sex exploitation industry. So stay with us.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. Last week I mentioned the new federal law against sex trafficking, classified advertising, and how that's been a decades and decades long battle by the women's movement. Notable among the groups that have fought that fight is CATW. CATW is shorthand for Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, and you can find them online at catwinternational.org. Their executive director, Taina Bien-Aimé, is an old friend and sister and a frequent guest on this program, and she's here with us again. Taina Bien-Aimé. Taina, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much, Robin, for having me.
Well, you're like extended family, I always feel. All right. So there's a lot of new listeners to the program who might not know what Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, shorthand CATW, is about and stands for. So bring them up to speed before we get into deeper waters.
So the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women is one of the oldest international organizations that, by its title, works to end trafficking in women and girls. But we look at the issue, including commercial sexual exploitation, as gender-based violence and discrimination issue.
And also there are specific projects that you have and you've initiated. Talk a little bit about them.
So we basically focus here in New York, where I'm based, although we have offices in Mexico and the Philippines, on legal advocacy, making sure that local, state, national, international laws really remember women and girls and their specific vulnerabilities to trafficking and sexual exploitation. We also work a lot on awareness raising because, as you know, the media and culture continues to kill us in ensuring that women continue to be objectified and sexualized and pornified. So that's a key piece of it. And one of the ways we do that is working with survivors. There is an incredible, growing global movement of the most brilliant and brave survivors of the sex trade, whose voices are really going to change the conversation and change policies and hearts, minds, and legislation.
Right. That's absolutely true. And the Prevention Project and the Project to Curb Male Demand for Prostitution also interest me those. Say a little bit about those two projects.
Our partners in the Philippines and Mexico and Colombia work very closely with men and boys because, as you know, unless we talk to all levels of the community about male privilege, toxic masculinities, and it's all about male sexual access to women's bodies, right? So we're looking at the Me Too movement, at the Time's Up movement. It's all the same. It is women are human beings, girls are human beings, and unless I invite you to touch me, make comments, or otherwise enter my sacred space, it is sexual harassment or worse. We're looking at a lot of forms of sexual exploitation or commercial sexual exploitation.
Yeah, and they're interestingly linked, aren't they? I mean, very often, let's say runaway girls fall into the Minneapolis pipeline and they are recruited to be in movies and they think that's glamorous and they wind up not realizing it's a pornography shoot. And then that moves them along the channels into prostitution, and then one day they're picked up and taken to another country, and that's traffic. I mean, there's no clear line of delineation in the sexual exploitation industry, as I've understood it.
No, and you can be trafficked in the Bronx, never having left your building, right? So
exactly.
Trafficking does not require movement. It really is about transporting, harboring, procuring someone, obtaining someone for purposes of sexual exploitation. So I think, there's a lot of work to be done. But again, we are in a world where Pretty Woman is going to be a musical on Broadway. I mean, it is endless, the barrage that just invades our lives and the lives of very young people, boys and girls, who look at this and say, oh, this is how I should behave on both ends, which is disastrous.
Right. So, but there has been progress, I know, because the Nordic solution, which basically does not penalize the prostituted person, but does penalize the buyers and the sellers, the brothel keepers, the pimps, has been, of course, a huge success in Sweden and Norway and Iceland, and has been adopted in France and both Northern Ireland and Ireland, and is spreading even further. And where it has been adopted, we find that the rates of prostitution go down, the rates of trafficking go down, the rates of sexual exploitation go down, and in other places where the opposite is true and so-called legalization of prostitution is adopted, they go up. This is like duh, but we're still fighting that front. But to update us on the status of the Nordic solution.
So now we can call it the global model or the equality model, because not only
that's good.
Yes, because now we have France. I mean, France practically invented prostitution. They glamorized it for centuries in their art and culture. So the fact that France recognized that prostitution is a system of exploitation, a system of violence against women, and I think we are moving in the right direction toward recognizing that this is along the spectrum of gender-based violence. It's not an exception of it.
Right. And I think it's important for people to understand as well that when this is spoken of as, quote, sex work or as choice, or even as empowering women, I've heard that argument too, the question needs to be asked, if this is what you need to do for a living, that's not a choice. My mind has always failed to grasp that argument that this is a free choice, because we know that in some countries, which are near to or already failed states, I mean, this is called survival sex because it's where you get your next meal. Well, that's not choice. And the selling of the, quote, sex worker line, what a happy, terrific, just like any other ordinary job, is funded by the sex industry. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, our opponents, people who really don't recognize the sexual exploitation of women, paid paid for rape, basically, are
Yes.
very significant organizations such as the Open Society Foundation that funds Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and everybody is really promoting the right of men to purchase women's bodies for sex. You know, to quote Rachel Moran, who's a formidable Irish survivor leader, who
Yes.
says, you know, when I was on the streets, homeless and hungry, what I wanted in my mouth was food and not a penis.
Yes.
She doesn't use the word penis, but I'll respect your your radio show.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have to have a vision that includes providing for people who don't have. You know, and that is the most
Yes.
vulnerable. We're talking about the most vulnerable people on the planet. So
That's right.
why would you condemn them? And we're talking in the United States, mostly white men who purchase mostly brown and black bodies,
Yes.
mostly young girls,
Yeah.
very young women,
Yeah.
right? So, and also, you know, this whole thing of 17 and 18. The difference between a 17 and an 18-year-old is 60 seconds.
That's
The
right.
sex buyer makes no distinction. All he wants is that she's young and she's exotic and
Yeah.
she will do anything that will satisfy his sexual fantasies.
Yeah. Yeah. And that this is part of a vast interlocking industry of pornography, of sex tourism, of mail order brides, is not known, I think, by ordinary people. I mean, you know, who go about their lives and think, oh, well, there's prostitution and that's different from trafficking. These are all interlinked and they are all catering to bringing out the worst in male human beings at the expense, cost, and health and life, in many cases, of female human beings. I think aren't the statistics that something that a prostituted woman has a higher rate of PTSD than men who have served in combat? I remember hearing that or reading that somewhere not long ago.
Yes. And also, you know, you talk about sort of the pervasive psychiatric, psychological, and also medical damage that it's caused, but we have no data on that. We do not know or care what serial sexual invasion for money by strangers does to a woman who is being, you know, penetrated in every orifice of her body every day, multiple times a day, every week, months, for years on end. But we also have to have hope. I congratulate all of these brave women who are coming out, whether they're on farms or in Hollywood, saying enough is enough, and we need to address what the patriarchal system means in our lives, in our workplaces, on the streets, in our homes, and in brothels or strip clubs.
Thank you so much, Taina, for all the work you do at Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, CATW, and for all the work.
I stand on your shoulders, Robin. I stand on your shoulders. So thank you so much for your brilliance and your unbelievable commitment.
No. Where would we be without you?
Thank you so much.
And now one more break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I will return directly with an unusual fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again with some fighting words. This week, something unusual in fighting words, because in celebration of Poetry Month, April being Poetry Month, and in celebration of being just so happy about my new book of poems, I'm going to read one of the story poems in the book. It's in 3 short parts with an introductory note, and it's called The Excavation. National Geographic Society announcement, June 2006. The 1,600-year-old mummified remains of a young adult were covered with red pigment and bear tattoos, and her imposing tomb signified high status. It was discovered 400 miles northwest of Lima, Peru, near the summit of the pyramid Huacacao Viejo, a sacred site in Moche culture which flourished well before the rise of the Incas. Among the burial trove, gold, fine textiles, semi-precious stones, weaving materials, and needles befitting a woman, lay 2 ceremonial war clubs and 28 spear throwers, items found never at women's grave sites, but exclusively in tombs of Moche men. Nearby lay the skeleton of another, smaller woman, dead from apparent strangulation, a hemp rope still around her neck. It was the rope, via radiocarbon analysis, that dated the burial of both women to approximately Common Era 450. 1. You are here. I know it. Where? Come to me. I command you. If I could see through this fog, I wander and wait, calling out for you, little one of my choosing, culled from the herd. Where are you? Come, I demand you. You were mine the moment I saw you, plucked you from filth to be granted my favor, raised high by me, brought to the great house. How hard you struggled, so small, but you kicked, spat, hit, scratched, screamed, and I laughed while they scrubbed you and wrapped you in silks, laughed as you gorged on roast pigeon and mangoes, laughed as you cowered and glared at me. You are near. I feel it. I command you to come to me. I know you can hear me, even through this thick fog. Useless to fight me. You know it. I always was different, stronger than all of my brothers, my father's true son, though a woman. I set my mind and my teeth on it, refusing to be female, not man, less than human. I was more than human, I knew it. When the others came from the north, it was I who led the Moche into battle. I cut down our enemies, laughed at their screams, killed and killed until none were left. My arms ached with killing. My enemies, my own kind, both saw me then with wonder, a woman of power, freak or demon. I would be neither. I would be a god. From that day men would fear me, women revere me, and all would worship me. I wore the condor-feathered cloak. There was a price. I was the object of their adoration, not their love. How can the devout imagine the unspeakable loneliness of their God? Then one day I was hunting, and there it was, hiding, squatting in its fetid hut, a creature of huge eyes and rags. You would come to love serving the god, though. You alone loved the me in the god. You watched when I bedded the man in the ritual, then killed him once my belly swelled with my daughter, the next god of war. When I fell, convulsing, the last sight I saw was you bent above, weeping for me as I died a hero's death. Why now are you silent? You are here, you must be. I left orders for it. You know I cannot be alone with these weapons that slew so many, tools I used to prove I was human. More, I was God. That was the price. You were the gift. 2. You are here. I fear you will loom up out of the fog as you did the day you seized me by my hair in the corner of the hut by the meadow. I had known 7 summers. You took me at 7 summers only. You laughed. My father groveled in gladness that I would be a slave to she who was both man and God. There would be food now, beer, gold, eager husbands for my sisters, an adobe house, a private mound for when my parents died. You will be raised high, my mother said. I knew nothing. only fear and loss. I would need to forget fear and loss if I wanted to live. But I wanted to die, though never enough. So I lived, the gods' favorite, crouched where you placed me, at your feet as you sentenced captives to death, at your table tasting each dish for poison, beside your nightmares each night before battle, beneath your bed linen, between your thighs. You stank of blood and spices, your voice softened at my name. Naked, I smiled and danced for you. I stripped off your armor. I bathed your scars, some thick as rope. Once, after you'd slain 20 men in a single day, they said, I held the basin while you vomited. I almost loved you then. And when you fell, I wept. It was so ordinary, like any woman's dying, no spear in hand, no war cry in the throat. But then I joyed in it. I joyed that it was over and each of us was free. Until that night, when I remembered that your end would mean my own, to serve you through the afterworlds, raised high in death. I ran. Such terror in my mouth I can still taste it, like the poison I had planned to slip you after tasting your food some day, but never had. Of course your priests and mourners caught me, dragged me as they had when I was 7, shrieking, fighting, to the tomb, where you lay swaddled in gold armor plates, encircled by your weapons and my weaving. Freedom would be forgetting fear, but I turned fear to hatred long ago. Now I must find new afterworlds to walk alone, as your calls echo through the space that yawns between us. I never loved you, though I could have. That last ensnarement beguiles me still, a slave's desire to speak to you, to make you understand. Except for this. That day inside your tomb they forced my face toward yours. I saw you stare at death through inset turquoise eyes. I felt the rope fall, heavy on my shoulders, then tighten round my throat. I sipped one final breath, knowing the last sight I would ever see would be your face, beautiful, severe, not seeing me. 3. Letter home from student interning at the Huaca Cao Viejo dig. The local Indians are so superstitious. They shake their heads and warn us that when you disturb a tomb, the so-called spirits rise and wander. They won't say whose spirits, though. This lady, wow. What do you think? A queen? The wife or daughter of a military chief? Can't be some mythic Amazon. We might never know. The professor says she might have been pregnant, maybe died of something called eclampsia, like convulsions, but he can't tell till there's a full lab analysis, which could take years. And the second woman might have been a suicide. I think they were lovers, and she was in despair over the queen's death. It's so romantic. But the professor thinks she was a sacrifice. That would follow the common practice of ancient Andean peoples. They made a ritual offering of a virgin to the spirit of a highborn person during their funeral rites. Glad I wasn't around then. He also says it's absurd to imagine that the women were lovers, and extremely unlikely they ever even met, much less knew each other. But the rope! How great is the rope! What a stroke of luck in dating the find. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's our program for today. This show is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMCLive.com for the show plus the archive of all our previous episodes. You can also stream, download, and subscribe to our show's podcast at iTunes, at Stitcher, and at Google Play. Be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter, and you can check out my website and blog at robinmorgan.net, and also find me on Facebook and Twitter, too. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us, and remember to check out rockwoodmusichall.com for information about my New York City May 3rd reading of poems from my new book, Dark Matter. And don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.